the old cliche of the person who tried his hand at all different kinds of business dealings and nothing was successful. His last attempt in the world of business was to set up a printing shop, but nobody would purchase anything that he printed. No one would come in and give him orders. So finally, in desperation, he decided he's going to print money. But this person was not very well thought out, so he decided to print $18 bills. He figured Chai is a number that's commonly used, so an $18 bill would be very convenient. So he prints stacks and stacks of his $18 bills, and he tries to pass it off in the stores, and he gets this queer look, and people pretty much tell him that an $18 bill is non-existent. So he says to himself, the problem is that in the big city they're too smart for me. So he travels off to the small little village. He says, over here, the people aren't so smart, I'll be able to pass this off without getting caught. So he goes into a fruit store and he asks, how much is that watermelon? And the man tells him $3. So he says, fine, here's an $18 bill, please give me change. And the proprietor of the fruit store says, an $18 bill? I never heard of an $18 bill. So the man says, that's because you're from the small little town. If you were in the big city, you would know. This is the newest thing. The Treasury printed $18 bills. And the man gives him a rather inquisitive look, a doubtful look. And he gives it his best act. And he says, you know what you're talking about. If you would come to the big city, you can ask any bank, you can ask any person on the street, there are $18 bills. I'm telling you. So he says, okay, I'll give you change. And he walks into the back and he comes out and he gives him change. He gives him 2 bills. And the man is so happy, he says, boy, did I fool him. And he goes running out and finally he looks at the 2 bills that he got changed and he sees that he got a $7 bill and an $8 bill. That's change. When you describe something, there are 3 different ways to describe it. Its dimensions, its measurements, the quality of the item, and what does it represent? What does it accomplish? If the item that you are describing is fake, $18 bill, for example, so in terms of its quality, in terms of its quantity, in terms of what it could accomplish and what it represents, it all amounts to the same thing, and that is 0. If he's lucky, 0. If he's unlucky, he may wind up in jail for it. This parsha begins with the inyan of Nidarim and the subsequent ability of the Chachamim to absolve Nidarim. Yet, at the beginning of the parsha, we have an interesting message. The pasuk begins, V'yidaber Moshe el Roshei HaMatos L'bnei Yisrael Leimer, Zeh HaDavar Shetziv Hashem. So Rashi points out, Zeh HaDavar, that while Moshe Rabbeinu sometimes began his nevuah with the words Koyamar Hashem, like Koyamar Hashem Kechatzos Halayla, and likewise the other Nevi'im also began their prophecies with the words Koyamar Hashem, but Moshe Rabbeinu had an additional level of nevuah, a higher level of nevuah, a prophecy that would begin with the word Zeh HaDavar. On a simple level, we can understand the difference between Koyamar Hashem and Zeh HaDavar. Koyamar Hashem is like a mashal. Koyamar Hashem, and this is like what Hashem said. In other words, the other Nevi'im would see a mashal, they would see a scene, they would have to interpret it, they would have to describe it. It was nevuah. But they would still have to give over this nevuah and explain it according to their tchunas and nefesh. By Moshe Rabbeinu, it wasn't just Koyamar Hashem, and this is like what Hashem said. Rather, it was Zeh HaDavar. No interpretations were necessary. No descriptions were necessary. Zeh HaDavar. This is what Hashem said. I am giving you over the words. I'm conveying the very same words that Hashem said. It was Shechina Medaberes Mitach Gerayim. The question is, if this Madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah, which is called Aflukar Yuhan Me'ira, you see it through a clear glass, was for the most part the common Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, why over here in Parshas Matos, more so than any other parsha or any of the other mitzvahs, is it stressed? Does the pasuk begin with Zeh HaDavar Shetziv Hashem? So the Lechavich of Zochain Lebracha explains, as quoted in the Sefer Torah Savos, as we mentioned beforehand. Generally speaking, when you want to describe something, there are 3 ways to describe it: Kamos, Eichos, and Mechos. Kamos is quantity. You're describing the dimensions of whatever you're describing: size, weight, height, length, width. And then there's Eichos. You're describing the quality of the item. What does it look like? What impression does it give? Is it nice? Is it ugly? Is it dark? Is it white? And then you can describe the mahus of something, the essence of something. So while kamas refers to its dimensions, and echos refers to its appearance, to its substance, mahus, its essence, refers to what does it accomplish on this world. The item surat nimis, what mark will it leave on those who come into contact with it? What effect does it have in its immediate environment? The person or thing you're describing, that's the mahus. The consistency of the individual's attitude, that's all included in mahus. So when you're describing a human being, there's kama, how big is he, how large is he, how small is he. And then there's echos. Echos would be benegeya, his lave, his heart. How would you judge his action? Is he a person who is quick to get angry? Is he a person who is quick to have rachmanis in someone else? Basically, the person's attitudes that affect those around him in terms of how they would react, how they would feel. Are people easygoing around him? Do you have to be tense around him? That's echos. And then there's mahus. The mahus really reflects his neshama, his surah pnimius. Who is this person? Who is he really? Now, if Reuven wants to explain something to Shimon, and Shimon is not at a level of understanding the item properly, Shimon is a small child, and Reuven wants to explain to him a little bit of a complex issue. So the way Reuven would do it is to create a story or a mashal and describe it to him in the form of the parable. If you want to describe the terrible ramifications of Geneva to a small child, so you may explain a story about a small child who got a candy, who got his snack for lunch, and another little boy was sitting next to him, and he didn't have a snack, and the other boy went out for recess, and he thought he was going to borrow it a little bit. You're not going to talk to him directly about the terrible destruction of society that comes through a lack of honesty, but you'll tell him a mashal. And through the mashal, the child will begin to understand on his own level the message you're trying to drive across. So the mashal itself, the dimensions of the mashal, the people in the mashal, the activities in the mashal could be viewed as kamas, quantity. There are certain amounts of people in the scene of the mashal. There's a certain amount of scenery. There are a certain amount of items, a certain amount of emotion. The lesson portrayed behind the mashal is the echos, is the quality, sort of the neshama, the attitude that you're conveying. And if indeed the mashal and the lesson works, and as a result the child accepts what he was taught, and is now more disciplined in his behavior when it comes to reaching into someone else's cookie jar, that is the mahus of the mashal. That is the essence of the mashal, that has indeed accomplished its objective. All the Nevi'im were Zaycha, and they understood their Bechina in the Ruah according to their Madrega, according to their Midas. Bilam, who was steeped in Gashmias, began his Nevuah with Vayisa Mishaloi. In other words, he carried the Nevuah, which was a Nevuah, but he carried it through his own Mahus. It would come out, it would be explained, it would be conveyed in a very Gashmiastic form. And to a great extent, it was limited to Guf and to Chaymer, and it never got to the Mahus part. It never got to the point where, indeed, he conveyed something that had an effect on someone. The other Nevi'im HaKadoshim, of course, did have a Mahus in their Nevuah. Their Nevuah had quantity, their Nevuah had dimensions, their Nevuah had stories, their Nevuah had quality, their Nevuah had lessons, and more important, their Nevuah had Mahus. It had, depending on which Navi and which time, it had its effect on Klal Yisrael. But still, the emanations from Shemayim, the Shefa, that came from the Rabbeinu Shalom through them, depended on the clearness of the lens. It depended on their mahus. Each Navi had his own particular quality. Each Navi had his own Maila, his own Nida, his own Inyan in Avdus Hashem that he formulated, that he worked out. And the Nevuah would come through that specific lens. And that's Koy. Koy Yamar Hashem. In other words, like this, like my Madrega, like my essence as to who I am, that is the limit of how I can absorb the Nevuah and in turn convey it to you. Moshe Rabbeinu, however, reached a level of anivus, which was far and beyond any other Navi's accomplishment. Moshe Rabbeinu, in lieu of his relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, viewed himself as ayin, as nothing. Now it's interesting. Chazal give us 3 descriptions of a nivus of modesty. David HaMelech said that I am salas ish, a worm and not a person. Avraham Avinu said, Anochi ofa ve'efa, I am merely ashes and dust. And Moshe and Aaron said, Vanachni ma, what are we? We are nothing. The Shloah Kodesh explains, the higher the level of a person, then the greater his madrega in anivus. Because the closer he is to the Rebbeinu Shalom, the more he sees that Ein Sof cannot be brought into any description of tzimtzum, into any limitation whatsoever. And who is the person? Keneged the Rebbeinu Shalom. B'dugma, the more you see in a telescope, the more you see of the universe, the more you realize how small, how tiny this planet is relative to the scale of what's out there. So we know in terms of Chazal, when you describe the different elements of matter, there is doimem, chai, tzemeach, and medaber. A doimem is a rock, dust, earth, no life as we can see whatsoever. Even though everything has a degree of life to it, but we just can't see it move. Then there's tzemeach, plant life. Then there's chai, there's animal life, and there's medaber, the person who speaks. This is how we measure the various different life forms in terms of its ability to function voluntarily. David HaMelech said, I am a worm, not a person. That was his madrega of anivus, which is a tremendous madrega of anivus, because the pasuk says David HaMelech meant that in terms of his relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The old story of the person who came for the first time to the big yeshiva, and he was allowed in, and he was shown Musar Seder. Everyone was sitting in front of a Musar Sefer, and he saw one person swaying back and forth saying, Ich bin a garnished, I'm a nothing. And this new enrollee to the yeshiva didn't know quite what to do, so he sat down next to this person. He also started to scream, Ich bin a garnished, I'm a nothing. And the first person turned to him and looked at him with disdain and said, you just walk in here and already he says he's a nothing. She's also supposed to be a nothing. Who do you think you are? So we're not talking about just a verbal play over here. David HaMelech said and meant, in terms of his relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I am salas v'layish. Rabbi Yonis Nevishitz writes the famous story of a person who sat in the corner and he was learning Svarim, and he was saying, Rebbeinu Shalom, I am a nothing compared to you. I am mamish nothing. I am completely in your hands. Who am I compared to you? So Rabbi Yonis writes, he was so impressed, such a honor. And then it came time for his aliyah, and he wanted shlishi, and the Gabbai didn't give him shlishi, and he came screaming at that Gabbai, yelling and threatening him. So Yonis Nebuch says, I couldn't hold myself back. I went over to him. I said, you just sat there before davening. You were learning Musar. You were learning Sifra Yir, and you were saying you are nothing. You are nothing. What is a human being? And now you come and you make such a big ruckus because you didn't get the fancy aliyah. You didn't get the big kavod. So he answered to Yonis Nebuch. He says, what are you talking about? He says, then I was sitting, and I was talking to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Can I get the Rebbeinu Shalom? I'm a nothing. But can I get that Gabbai? I'm a million times better than him. How dare him insult me and not give me the nicest aliyah? Real anivus means when a person says it and lives by it. So David HaMelech said, and was by the madrega of, I am a worm, not a person. A tremendous madrega in the Nevuah, but a worm is still a living thing. Avraham Avinu's madrega of anivus was anochi offer ve'efer, a doime, even a higher level of anivus, a greater level of bittul, relative to the respective levels of the avos and the shivaroyim, which we have no shaychus to. Moshe and Aaron's level of anivus was anachni mo, we are nothing, not even a doime. Relative to their relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they consider themselves non-existent virtually, the madrega of ayin. What blocks a person's ability to perceive the Dvar Hashem? His being, his self, his thinking about himself, his physical guf. That's why the more anivus, the more bittul, the more a person is zoicha to Ruach HaKodesh. No one could have been zoicha to a higher level of nevuah than Moshe Rabbeinu, who came to the madrega of ayin. Moshe Rabbeinu reduced himself in his relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to non-existent as a result when the Nevuah came down, Kaviyachol from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there was nothing blocking it. It didn't have to go through any lens. There was nothing to veil it. It came out clear. When you want to trust someone, how do we measure our level of whether or not I should trust him? I say, what does he stand to gain? The more he's no gay avidover, the more he stands to gain, based on his testimony one way or another, the less reason I have to believe him, and the more reason I have to say that either he's chas v'shalom lying, and even if he's not lying, he may bend it in one direction. Even if he's not tilting the information in one direction, he may perceive it in one way, because he's no gay avidover. If he's totally not no gay avidover, if he's non-existent in terms of the information that he's conveying, it doesn't affect him one way or another, then he's more believable. Then the information that's coming through is less colored. So in that sense, Moshe Rabbeinu, who ceased to exist, who clearly conveyed the Dvar Hashem as is, it was not changed or colored or in any way given over in terms of Moshe Rabbeinu's personal perspective, because there was no personal perspective in terms of his relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore, it was the clear Nevuah, the Dvar Hashem straight to Klal Yisrael. What are the components of a neder? A person has a machshava, a person has an idea, a person wants to accomplish something, and he verbalizes it in the form of a vow, in the form of a neder. The neder brings out his machshava mikoyach al hapoyel. This is what I want to do, this is what I have in mind to do, and therefore I promise to do it. But we human beings, we are so obsessed with our own titles, with such concern for our own honor, with our own agenda, that sometimes we think we're sincere, and we can be exactly the opposite. We accept certain commitments in the hope that it's going to make us a better person, and what we really want is for people to think we're a better person. And therefore the Chacham has an ability to analyze the person. The Chacham who is removed from the Giyah, the Chacham who is so much closer to the Emes because he worked in his midas and was mevatel himself, can do such a better job in questioning us, in interrogating us, and finding out what we really want. And as a result, he's going to explain to us, you never meant to say this. You would have never done this. And that is the basis for how the Chacham is matir the neder. It's hard for us to be sincere. We're too biased. But with our association to the Chacham, we're lifted to the Madrega of Emes. And therefore, it is this very idea of Zeh HaDavar, Moshe Rabbeinu's clear Nevuah, unchanged, uncolored, which is the yesod and basis of our making Nedarim and the Chachamim having the ability of being matir the Nedarim. Moshe Rabbeinu selected a small army of 12,000 tzaddikim, 1,000 per shevet, to go out and to avenge Midian. These were all tzaddikim. They didn't even want to go. They heard that Moshe Rabbeinu was destined to leave this world right after the war, so they refused to participate. Each soldier begged Moshe, please, take someone else instead of me. I don't want to go to war. Moshe Rabbeinu had to cast lots and draft them against their will. These were great tzaddikim. Pinchas led them. And Moshe Rabbeinu gave a shmuz to the soldiers before they departed and inspired them to do tshuva, to be pure of any vestige of chait. Moshe Rabbeinu foresaw that Bilam could call forth powers of tumah, and he knew that the Bnei Yisrael would only be able to overcome them if the people directly involved in the battle with Bilam were naki min hachet, clean of sin. So we get an idea of who we are talking about over here. The army of Midian vastly outnumbered the Jewish forces. As a matter of fact, when they saw that only 12,000 were coming, they were so happy. They said when there were 600,000, we were able, with our malicious plan of being machshel them in chet by sending our daughters there to destroy so many of them, 24,000 died in the Megeifa. Now that there's only 12,000 marching toward us, it will be a cinch to destroy them. But these 12,000 were tzaddikim. These 12,000 were nakim min hachet. And 12,000 who are clean of chet are much more powerful than 600,000 when you don't have everyone who is nakim min hachet. And therefore, although indeed the army of Midian vastly outnumbered the Jewish forces, the Bnei Yisrael overpowered the enemy, and Bilam himself, who had now come to collect his money, his fee for the death of the 24,000 Jews, happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He tried to save himself by flying high, but Pinchas followed him. How high did he fly? The Lashon in the Medrash is he flew up until the Kisei HaKavod. What does that mean? The Mefarshim explain it means that Bilam tried to be Ma'ir v'Cheit. In other words, he knew when you're Mekatrik and Klal Yisrael, when you speak Lashon Hara, that has an effect. So he wanted to stand before the Kisei HaKavod and said, but look how Klal Yisrael sinned. It's true. It was my idea to entice them to sin, but the fact is that we're not Oimid ben Asayin. And Pinchas followed him there. So how did Pinchas follow him there? Pinchas followed him and was Ma'ir Chusin for Klal Yisrael. And said it's true, Klal Yisrael sinned, but the Asayin was overwhelming. And you see that with my Mesiras Nefesh, the entire thing stopped. Chazal tell us, Pinchas raised the tzitz, the plate on the Kohen Gadol's forehead. You had the words Kodesh Lashem and turned it toward Bilam and the kings who were flying through their kishes in the air, and that was the end of their flight. They came down to a harsh landing and an exit to this world. Now we know that the tzitz was mechater on accidental tumah in the Beis Hamikdash. So the tzitz was a kind of statement that Klal Yisrael be'etzem is tahar. Klal Yisrael be'etzem seeks tahara. But sometimes we're overwhelmed by the Yetzer Hara. Tzitz, the Rebbeinu Bachai says, comes from the Lashon of Neitzitz min hacharakim. Meaning that even though sometimes the Yetzer Hara overwhelms us, and we're sort of engulfed by the pressures and powers of Tumah, but if a Yid is maimin b'yamunah shalem, that the Rebbeinu Shalom is constantly looking at him, that infuses somewhat of a Kedusha even in what would appear to be the most Tumah-oriented situations. The tzitz is another way of saying, yes, we stumbled, we sinned, but it's not because we don't believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was looking at us, it's just that we made a mistake. We allowed ourselves to be swept up by our passions, but we don't feel good about it. And we definitely have this tremendous urge to want to do tshuva, to say, we're sorry. How can we be chayta with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence giving us our very breath? That kind of an attitude, even after fate, brings down the most powerful bilam soaring through the air. Now, after the return of the soldiers, several incidents occurred. Amongst them, Elazar HaKohen explained to Klal Yisrael how to kasher the kelim. They had brought back so many vessels that were used for non-kosher foods. And Elazar HaKohen explained to the people the laws of kashering them. And he gave them, which he had learned from Moshe Rabbeinu, the most important rule in all of the halachos of Yeridei. And that is, the way it goes in is the way it goes out. The method of kashering depends on its previous use. For example, if something of a spatula or a grill was used with non-kosher food, and it was directly roasted over the fire, it has to be kashered through torching, through libun. And if the vessel was used for cooking hot liquids and foods, it has to be kashered by being immersed in boiling water. And plates or cups that were used for cold food have to be washed with cold. Because that's the rule. However it comes in, however the absorption of Isser comes in, you have to get it out with the same degree of heat. Now the Pasha is introduced, and then we have the different categories of Kalim. This presents a question. Why Zois Chukas HaTorah? The term Chak applies to the mitzvah of Shatnez, Paraduma, things that we have absolutely no idea why it is so. But these halachas seem logical. It shouldn't be a chak. If Isser was absorbed through heat, you need the same degree of heat to remove the Isser. Why is this a chak? Why is this chukas HaTorah? So there's a Ma'ir de Gevart from Moshe V'chaim Levrach. He says over here, the Zois chukas HaTorah doesn't suggest that we don't understand the reason for the guidelines of kashering kelim. The Zois chukas HaTorah is a hagdama to explain that after you understand the halachas of kashering kelim, take this a step further. Use this rule to understand how all the halachas of the Torah work. These halachas don't just explain how you take a pot that was used for a tray for Frankfurter and now you can use it for kosher ones. These halachas, explains Rav Moshe, tells us how life works. Regardless of how low someone has fallen, regardless of how much one's life already passed and we feel that in Ruchnius we have accomplished so little and we're so far, and that we are so absorbed with hate, the tumah of the street has become so much part of our essence that the Yid may chas v'shalom feel, forget it. I can never really open up a siddur or open a Gemara and actually pronounce words with any degree of purity. Chas v'shalom. Everything could be kashered. From the most superficial iser, like a cold trace of liquid that has to be washed, to the most severe iser, like a grill that was holding trace of meat. Of course, there's a difference. The grill that was very, very hot and there was no liquid in between requires a much more thorough kashering. But everything could be kashered. So if the chait was committed with more passion, with less remorse, so it requires a more powerful tshuva, a more sincere tshuva, a deeper tshuva. But there is a tshuva for everything. And this applies l'chal terakol. And even though the Gemara says there are certain areas that tshuva doesn't help for, but the Shloach Kodesh says it all depends on the level of tshuva. There is a tshuva that is hot enough to help for any of them. And it's very important to understand also that Gehenim is not a Kadosh Baruch Hu's revenge. Gehenim is a laundromat. It's a cleaning process. Naturally, if someone has a little dust in their hair, you need a soft comb. If someone fell into wet concrete, so you need a real strong iron brush, and it hurts more. You need hotter water. But the degree of Yisurim to cleanse chait is not a Kadosh Baruch Hu's revenge, chas v'shalom, just the opposite. It's just that whatever is necessary for this neshama to have a tikkun, to be cleansed, and every neshama eventually reaches its tikkun. Ki lo yidach mimenu nidach. No one is ultimately pushed away. So in the course of life, people undergo various difficulties. For whatever reason, only a Kadosh Baruch Hu knows. Whether it's a tzaddik that's being tested, whether it's someone who is zeichet to such a tremendous olam haba in the world to come that he has to be purified beyond any shadow of a doubt, whatever the case may be. The intensity of difficulties in life depends on what that person needs for his tikkun, for her tikkun, for his tahara, or for her tahara. As a result, it says, chukas haTorah. Chak means something we don't understand. In the course of life, people experience difficulties that sometimes we don't understand. Why does so-and-so have to endure it? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, if you would know the kind of Olam Haba that is awaiting that person, if you would know the tikkunim that this neshama needs, whether from this Gilgal or from the previous Gilgal, or if you would know, given the Madrega of this neshama, how high and what tremendous chad this neshama can eventually reach if it's completely pure. Whatever the Cheshbainis of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are, we don't know. So what? Some of the neshama is to be completely cleansed down here in this world so they can go straight into Gan Eden. It's a chak. You'll never figure it out. We'll never figure it out. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to believe that nothing happens by chance. And the more difficult situations are, only prove that this neshama is in a more complex cleaning process. And therefore, this concept of kibolei kachpaltai, that the way it's swallowed, that's how you have to get it out, falls under the category of zois chukas haTorah. It's a chak. Life in general is a chak. Moshe Rabbeinu could also not understand why sometimes it appears that it's tzaddik v'tovel is a rasha v'ra'ala. But the Torah Kadosh is telling us, down here it's a chak. L'yasud love, you will understand that everyone had to go through what they had to go through for their particular cleansing process. The Chidah breaks down this process specifically. We see in the Pasha 4 different categories of new utensils. Brand new utensils purchased from an akum required tefillah. Even if no one ever cooked anything in them, but the fact that it was owned by an akum already means that it requires tefillah. If the akum used it in warm water even once, it requires kashering in hot water. That's how you pull out the absorption. Third category, if it was used directly over fire, it requires libun, it requires torching. And the fourth category is if it's an earthenware keli, if it's kli cheres, then the only way to remove the absorption is by breaking the keli. In other words, there is no way to remove the absorption. It is so porous, the texture is so open that once an absorption goes in, the only thing you can do is break it. Schacter. When it comes to kashering people, the Gemara in Masechtas Yuma also tells us that there are dalet chiluke kapara. Rabbi Shmuel tells us that a person is over on a mitzvah saseh, in other words, the lack of fulfilling a positive commandment. If he's over on a loy saseh, then tshuva and Yom Kippur are mechater. If he's over on krisis or misas bezdin, on an aveira that would carry a fee of krisis or misas bezdin, then you need tshuva, Yom Kippurim, and yisurim for a kapara. And if he was over on chilul Hashem, then only misas a kapara. Dr. Chida, the guf, the body, is a keli for the neshama. Just like a keli, even though it's brand new, there's no issur in it, but you have to be mitayris b'tefillah. That's someone who wasn't over any aveir, but merely for not doing what he was supposed to do. There's already somewhat of a pagam on him. Tshuva and charata alone are effective. Then you have the second category. The keli that was used in hot water requires to be kasher in hot water. The guf that toiveled itself in hot water, referring to the eish of the Yetzer Hara, needs the eish of tainus, of Yom Kippur and tshuva, in order to draw out the yisr. Incidentally, Reb Chaim Volozhin says in the Sefer Ruach Chaim that if a person is meiser nefesh himself through limud ha-Torah, that too is fire. That eish ha-Torah also kasher. The words of the Torah are called words of fire, which means that a person is meiser nefesh himself for a mitzvah, and if there is agmas nefesh in that mitzvah, you do an act of chesed, you sit down to learn, and it's difficult, and everything seems to be getting in your way. Good! The more mesirus nefesh, the more difficult, the more frustrating it is, the higher the fire, then the better the self-cleaning oven works. And if the aveira that a person engages in is an aveira which carries a chiyuv of krisis or misas bezdin, it's harder to get it out of the person. It requires libun, it requires the torture. And therefore Rabbi Shmuel tells us over here, tshuva, Yom Kippurim, and yisurim nachmano litzlan are necessary. If he's over in chilul Hashem, then he's like a kli cheres, which requires shvira. But shvira means when a yid is totally broken by himself and realizes what he did, and he wants to start all over again, that too is considered breaking. It is for this reason one of the big tzaddikim used to dash in every Shabbos tshuva about the halachos of kasher and kelim. And they said to him, wouldn't that be more appropriate for Pesach? And he said, no, the halachos of kasher and kelim are the halachos of tshuva. Now the pasuk tells us when Moshe Rabbeinu was angry at the soldiers, he suggested that maybe they had sinned. And they answered, no, not a single one of us sinned. They said, we did not enter any Midianite house alone, but only in pairs, 2 of us at a time. Nevertheless, the soldiers said, we want to offer karbanos as a kapara. So Moshe Rabbeinu asked them, if you say you did not sin, why do you need a kapara? They explained that they want to make amends even for sinful thoughts. After all, they were in compromising situations where they had to go in and take battle and capture the women. They did not sin, but they want a kapara for their machshava. But why is this issue discussed now? Look at the sequence of the psukim. First they come back from battle, there's a whole issue between who they should have killed, who they should have not killed. Moshe Rabbeinu is angry at them as a result of his kas. He forgets the halacha. Allah has to teach him all the halachas of kasher and kelim. And now we come back to a request. And part of the soldiers, they want to be makriv a carbon as a kapara. Should they have not made this request immediately upon returning from battle? And the soldiers came back proud. They said, we did not sin. And it's true, they did not sin. And they took precautions not to sin. But then, when they heard the halachas of kasher and kelim, they said, look at this keli. You cook a piece of meat in a pot. You wash it out. Scrub it. It's steel wool. Soap. It's sparkling clean. You could see your own face in it. It shines so much. Yet, you're not allowed to use it. Why? It's a trefa pot. A trefa pot, what's in here? Absorption. It was exposed to the trefa meat. Don't think because it was rinsed clean that the taste isn't in here, below the surface. The kashering of Kalim taught them, yes, we refrain from sin, and they deserve all the credit and the schar for that, which indeed they will get. But we cannot fool ourselves and walk away and say it has no effect on us. Because wherever a person is, even if he washes himself and he is careful, the reality is we absorb the factors of our environment. And sometimes these subconscious absorptions of different types of air that we are exposed to are more difficult to clean than the mamoshais, than the actual meat. That you just take out and rinse off. These absorptions that have become part of our body and part of our psyche without us even realizing that it's within us, that requires kashering. And that's what scared the soldiers. The halachos of kashering the kelim taught them, we need more of a kapara. We think it had no effect on us, but we don't want to fool ourselves. When Rabbi Chanan Wasserman Hashem Yakum Zami was in America, he was sitting in the back of a car driving through a certain undesirable street in Manhattan, and this is a half a century ago. And they used to have the 1940 style cars, high roofs, curtains around the windows. You couldn't see anything outside. But Rabbi Chanan said, quickly, let's pass through here. I feel the absorptions of Tumah. The more tahar a keli is, the more sensitive it is to anything to the contrary. The Melech Tzidkiyahu knew that he was supposed to be loyal to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar hadn't destroyed the Beis Hamikdash yet, but he had virtual control over Yerushalayim. The Yidden were still there. And the status quo at this point was tolerable. As long as Tzidkiyahu maintained his loyalty to Nebuchadnezzar, it seemed that at least the situation was stable. But once Tzidkiyahu came into Nebuchadnezzar and he beheld a rather ghastly sight, Nebuchadnezzar was eating a live rabbit. Nebuchadnezzar noticed that Tzidkiyahu saw this, so he made him swear that he would not reveal it to anybody. Indeed, Tzidkiyahu did swear, but he went to the Sanhedrin to be matir the shruah. Apparently they found the Pesach, and he revealed it. And it got back to Nebuchadnezzar. And Tzidkiyahu would face a horrible death as a result of this. But not only Tzidkiyahu, Nebuchadnezzar was going to avenge the Sanhedrin for being matir his neder. The Medrash says in the Pasuk in Eicha that the Ziknei Bas Sion were forced to sit on the ground. What happened over here was when Nebuchadnezzar came to Yerushalayim, the Sanhedrin came out to greet him. And he looked at them and he was impressed with them. They were Anoshim Shel Surah. And at first he gave them great honor. And Nebuchadnezzar ordered them to read the entire Torah from Bereshis. When they got to Parshas Matos, V'yidaber Moshe el Roshei HaMatos, Nebuchadnezzar asked them, do the Sanhedrin have a right to be matir a neder? If a person made a neder and he wants that neder absolved, is there any solution for him? So they told Nebuchadnezzar the truth. That Yelech Eifel Chacham, a person has an option of going to the Chacham, the Yatir Lo Nidroi, if the Chacham indeed finds a Pesach. And then Nebuchadnezzar said, if that's the case, so it is true, you were the ones that were matir Tzidkiyahu Shruah, Miyad Hashiva Mal Gabi Karka, he took them off their royal kind of chairs that he had placed for them, or a special kind of royal wagon, and he made them all sit on the ground, and eventually they suffered horrible torture. The Chaim does an interesting part. Rashi tells us, why does it say over here, B'dafka, in regard to this pasuk, that Moshe spoke first to the Roshei HaMatos? The truth is, we know that in regard to all of the mitzvahs, generally speaking, Moshe Rabbeinu first taught it to Aaron, then it was taught to Aaron's children, then it was taught to the Zekanim, and then to all of Klal Yisrael. So it's not necessarily exclusive to Nidarim that it was Roshei HaMatos. Why Dafka over here does the pasuk say V'yidaber Moshe el Roshei HaMatos, and Moshe spoke first to the heads of the Shvatim? So Rashi says it's to emphasize that Heter Nidarim requires a Yachid Mumcha. In other words, you can either go to a bezdin of three people that understand, they can be matir the neder. But if you're going to one person to be matir the neder, he can't just be any one person. He has to be a Yachid Mumcha. He has to be a great Talmid Chacham. So that's where the pasuk begins on Roshei HaMatos. The Medrash says a different nekuda. The reason Moshe Rabbeinu spoke over here to the Roshei HaMatos, and there is an emphasis that he explained the halacha to the heads of the Shvatim and didn't openly publicize it as much, is that Moshe Rabbeinu did not want the Ami Huarasim to understand the concept of Hataras Nidarim and to feel that it's an available heter, because this way there would be no Kalas Rosh B'Nidarim. In other words, the whole idea of Nidarim would then, to the Amaratzim, become something that is very temporary. A switch that you turn on and you turn off, there's no problem. You can always go to a Chacham and he'll find a Pesach, which isn't always easy, because the Ma'aser the Chacham has to find a Pesach. The Chacham has to find a basis to be matir the neder, an opening. The Chacham has to be able to establish that the neder was made b'tais, that there was a mistake, that had you known this and that at the time of the neder, you would have never made the neder. If the Chacham doesn't find the Pesach, then he cannot absolve the neder. Rabbi Akiva's father-in-law, and Kal B'Savua, the richest person, or one of the richest people in all of Yerushalayim, desperately was looking for a Chacham to be matter the neder. Here he had made a neder to ask for all of his estate, so that his daughter cannot have anything from him. And he saw his daughter all these years living alone, and she was mamish starving. And he couldn't give her a thing. He was going out of his mind, but he couldn't find a Chacham to be matter the neder. Until finally, this great tzaddik came back with 24,000 talmidim, and he went running to him. And he said, please, when my daughter got married, she married such an Amoritz, I was so angry, I made a neder that she would never have any benefits from anything that I own, and now I want to help her, I want to support her. Can you find a Pesach? I'm waiting now 24 years, and no Chacham can find a Pesach for me. So this great tzaddik that came with the 24,000 talmidim said to someone who was really his own father-in-law, he said, tell me, had your son-in-law known how to learn, at least had he known as much as I do, would you have made a neder? He laughed. As much as you do, Rebbe. Had he known anything, I wouldn't have made the neder. So Rabbi Akiva told him, Mutulach, 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 guess who I am? I'm your son-in-law. But for 24 years, he saw his daughter hungry, and he couldn't do anything about it. He was the richest person in Yerushalayim, and he went to every Chacham, but no one can find a Pesach. And therefore, the Medrash says, Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to the Rosh Hamatos. He didn't want Hataras Nedarim to be well known, because the Amaratzim will be like how it's like in the Nedarim. They simply won't understand that it isn't as simple as turning the switch on and turning it off. You can't just erase the neder. You're bound by it unless you find the legal Pesach. The famous story of a man in Vilna who decided to swear that he would never step out of the Beis HaMedrash. Apparently he thought that was a very noble thing to do. The only problem was he didn't take into account the idea that he has to eat, that he has to wash his clothes, and there may be things that he has to take care of outside of the Beis HaMedrash. And of course the people saw what was happening, and he was stuck. So they brought him food and they brought him clothes, but it was going on for years and it was getting a little bit out of hand. The man made one statement, one sentence, I swear I'm never going to walk out of the Beis HaMedrash. And essentially what happened afterwards was everyone else was now his eved. They were meshub that they had to work to keep him alive forever. No Chacham can find a Pesach. Whatever they tried to say, whatever they tried to ask, whatever they tried to sort of fetch out of him in terms of an interrogation, did you know this? Had you known this? Had you known how difficult it would be? Had you known how everyone else would resent it? And he kept on saying, yes, I knew. So there was no Pesach. And once Rabbi Akiva Eiger came to town, and they told him about this problem. He said, let me go see him. So he came to shul. And then now the person was lying on a bench. I don't think he was doing much learning anyway. And he couldn't believe his eyes. He saw Rabbi Akiva Eiger coming in. So he jumped up and said, well, why is the Gadol Adar coming to this shul? So Rabbi Akiva Eiger said, do I have a choice? No one knows what to do with you. And Imam fell to his feet and he began to cry. He said, Rabbi Akiva Eiger, great Rebbe, had I known that my neder would have been such a burden that even the Tzaddik Adar would have to come, I would have never made such a neder. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger told him, Mutalach, Mutalach, Mutalach. You have just found the Pesach. But it took Rabbi Akiva Eiger to figure that out. The truth is, being matter the neder was more complicated over there, because there is a din that it has to be a mistake that took place b'shas ha-neder. In other words, it had to be, had you known that during the time of the neder that a certain situation existed, would you have made the neder? If a certain situation only arose after he made the neder, it's not a valid Pesach to say, oh, had I known this would happen, I wouldn't have made the neder. It has to be, I didn't know that a certain situation was in place already during the neder, whatever the case may be. Hataras Nedarim is complicated and it is not well understood. And it just isn't that you can go to the Rav and give a pidyon and say, be master my neder. Here, I paid for it. Why won't you do it for me? It's not that simple. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu spoke only to the Rosh Hamatos. He wanted the Amarasim to understand that if you make a neder, for the most part, maybe they know the thing of Hataras Nedarim, but generally speaking, if you made a neder, you have to abide by it. So the Chassam Sofer, this is what Nebuchadnezzar had in mind over here. Nebuchadnezzar knew the Pasha of Hataras Nedarim. He didn't need the Sanhedrin to read the entire Torah for him. However, he wanted to make a point. He had the Sanhedrin read the entire Torah from Bereshis until Parshas Matos. As soon as they said the words, V'yidaber Moshe al Rosh Hamatos, and they translated it, so Nebuchadnezzar made them stop. And he said, so how come when it came to this halacha of Hataras Nedarim, how come Moshe Rabbeinu spoke only to the Rosh Hamatos? And they answered what the Medrash says. Because they did not want, Moshe Rabbeinu did not want, that the Ami Horasim should go around and talk about Hataras Nedarim that much. They should realize when you make a neder, as a general rule, you have to abide by it. And there's a certain union of Chil Hashem if a tzaddik makes a neder and he doesn't hold to it, because people don't really understand the concept of Hataras Nedarim well enough. And here's where Nebuchadnezzar got angry. So he said, fine, Sanhedrin. So you had a technical reason to be matir the neder, or the shvua, that Tzidkiyahu made. But what about the Chil Hashem? What about the fact that the whole world knew that Tzidkiyahu made a shvua to be loyal to Nebuchadnezzar, and you simply undid it in public? This is what Nebuchadnezzar was looking for. This was his criticism to the Sanhedrin. You may have been technically right. You may have found a Pesach. But you see, when it comes to publicly being matir nedarim, it's something that's supposed to be kept quiet. And they suffered a terrible death as a result of this. And indeed, Tosfos says that what was one of the reasons the Sanhedrin was punished? After all, they acted within the gedarim of halacha by being matir the neder, because you're supposed to take into account the inyan of Chil Hashem. If someone makes a shvua or a neder, and you're matir the neder, and as far as the people are concerned, Jews don't have to adhere to their commitments, to their vows. They don't understand the Hataras Nedarim. And the Sanhedrin should have abstained from being matir the neder based on the Chil Hashem concern. We all know the story of the Gevonim. They came to Yehoshua, and they claimed they came from a faraway land, and really they were Canaanim. But they dressed in clothes as if it was tattered and worn, and they had traveled a long time, and they had empty jugs of water, and so on. And Yeshua, for his part, swore to them that he would not harm them, that he was accepting them. Later, when he found out they were Canaanim, so he was bound by his shvua. Now, apparently, if there was any clear-cut Pesach, it was over here. I mean, the whole thing was a mistake. His shvua was based on the fact that, indeed, they were Gevonim from a faraway land and that they were not Canaanim. However, there would have been a Chil Hashem, and that's why Yeshua was bound to the neder. That's how Chazal explained it. Not everyone is going to understand, Yeshua had a Pesach, he had a legal right. People are going to say, Jews swear, and then their word is nothing. There may have been other technicalities over there in neder that comes out and there are certain types of nedarim that you cannot absolve, but l'maisa Chil Hashem was the overriding concern. And the Chossefer stresses this. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu meant when he spoke to the Roshi Hamatos. It's hard to say Nebuchadnezzar was a Rasha for killing the Sanhedrin. He's going to be punished for it. But l'maisa, as well as for destroying the Beis Hamikdash, of course. But l'maisa, he was correct in his interpretation of the pasuk. The Sanhedrin were wrong, and he pointed it out to them. But Yadaber Moshe Roshi Hamatos, Moshe Rabbeinu was giving a very important lesson over here to the Roshi Hamatos. He said that when you paskin halachas, you have to take into account two things: the technicality of whether something is aser or mutter, and even after you, as the Nesiya Hadar, you as the Gedolim, even after you establish that something is technically mutter, you have to look into the Chil Hashem aspect of it. If the world is not going to understand it, and there is a Chil Hashem, then you cannot rely on the heter, even if the heter is valid. It applies to Nedarim, and it applies to many, many other things. Incidentally, if Tzidkiyahu did see such a ghastly thing that Nebuchadnezzar was eating a live rabbit, why did he feel it so necessary to be matir the shvua and to tell everyone about it? Why couldn't he keep this rather grotesque piece of information to himself? So the Mefarshim on the Medrash explained that Nebuchadnezzar had a cheshbon over here. Nebuchadnezzar had plenty to eat. He didn't need live rabbits. But Nebuchadnezzar was planning to destroy the Beis Hamikdash, and he was planning to attack Klal Yisrael with an achzarius, with a kind of sadistic, torturous manner that he felt that he himself wasn't up to yet. And therefore he wanted to ingrain within himself the midas retzicha. And Tzidkiyahu noticed this. He knew that Nebuchadnezzar didn't just decide today I'm going to eat a live rabbit. Nebuchadnezzar was trying to sort of impart within himself a power to kill without mercy, to rip someone alive. And Tzidkiyahu felt it was important for Klal Yisrael to be warned against this. Shwab Chaim Baruch explained that the emes, the koyach hadibur, is an amazing thing. It's not just an ability that a person has to present his thoughts in the form of words, but one person speaks to someone else, and he influences someone else on the basis of what he says, whether in a positive way or in a negative way. There's sort of a hiskashris moyach l'moyach. There's sort of a direct communication, an email, so to speak. Information that is channeled from one brain to the other through the koyach hadibur. The koyach hadibur influences lives. It changes people. It can influence masses. But people don't realize that the koyach hadibur influences ourselves.
When a Yid makes a neder, he creates a midas hadin. He creates a powerful kitrug. He now is bound by the neder. Should he violate the neder, there are the worst einshim. The idea of nedarim should impress upon a person just how powerful speech is. I can take anything. I can take any apple in the world and say, I offer this apple upon myself, and then be subject to an unbelievable series of einshim by violating this apple, an issur that I created with my words. It should impress upon a person the power of his words. In a positive sense, his words of tefillah. In a negative sense, what it means, how you can undo a person by saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. Nidarim is an inyan of midas hadin, and therefore Chazal say, Nidarim are not something that is preferred. Why are you getting involved in things that you may not be able to get out of? And why are you subjecting yourself to possible punishments? Chazal say, and this teaches us that when a person is in an eis sarah, he should make a neder. That's because the Shasa Sakana explains, Schwab, there's midas hadin anyway. We see that there is a potential for punishment. So by a person creating a neder, he sort of channels the midas hadin to a specific arena, and he says, if this I can deal with, and the mela, I'm diverting the midas hadin from the area that I am concerned about. So if a person is traveling, he's in the Shasa Sakana, he knows he has to face a very difficult situation, and the Satan is makashik the Shasa Sakana. So he's makabel upon himself a certain inyan. From now on I'll be makbid on tefillah b'tzibur, from now on I'll give tzedakah. And he's really creating midas hadin with his Kabbalah. However, he's diverting the midas hadin from the potential danger to his Kabbalah. And therefore, under these circumstances, it is something positive. Chazal tell us, in nasa adin lemata, ein adin nasa l'mayla. So I'm in Hagin, in certain places, in Polish Chasidus, in that the whole night of Rosh Hashanah they learn Choshen Mishpat. Because they're diverting the midas hadin through the Torah, and therefore they take it away from the potential punishments as a result of the person's aveiros. The Mela, right after the Pasha of Nedarim, the Yidden are sent to take Nekama me'eis HaMidyanim. Because before they went into war, before they were in a difficult situation, they were makabel upon themselves Nedarim. In this light, the neder is considered something positive. So this is another lesson that Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching Klal Yisrael over here in terms of the sequence of Parshiyos. Now, before a time of war, it is appropriate to be makabel upon yourself an inyan b'neder b'shua, but not as a general rule. It's not as that we stay away from the Nedarim and Shuos anyway because of the complexity and the seriousness of the Einish. Although the idea of being makabel upon yourself to do something good in an eis sarah, of course, is still valid and still preferred. But you can have the benefit of diverting the midas hadin through a Kabbalah without an official neder or shua. I'm just committing myself to certain mitzvahs. The Baruch Shem has a chus that should help me. And perhaps this is another inyan in Rashi Hamatos. My father's Chaim told me that during the war in his yeshiva, the Rashi Yeshiva suggested this. During a very difficult crisis, they took out the Sefer Torah, they passed it from bacher to bacher, and everyone swore that they would remain together and loyal to Torah and mitzvahs regardless of the difficulties. And the Rashi Yeshiva gave them a nusach to say. Later on, they were told that the text read according to the consent of the Rashi Yeshiva, and based on what they say, we accept upon ourselves, we swear, so on and so on. It turned out later that the Rashi Yeshiva had gotten together beforehand and declared that they don't really mean to make a shul. And being that everyone said based on what the Rashi Yeshiva say, so it wasn't a real shul. But the Bachrim didn't know that, and therefore the commitment remained a serious commitment. And there was a serious message for that commitment. So perhaps that's another shot by Yedaber Moshe, Rosh Hamatos, L'bnei Yisrael. Teach them shuos, but sometimes not everyone has to know everything.
I heard of an elder Yid who once had a minor operation, a hernia operation. And the next morning the doctor came in and said, I want you off your bed today. That's the only way you're going to heal. But it hurts, he told the doctor. No excuses. If you get off your bed and you walk around, you're going to get better. So the patient said to the doctor, but you don't know what it feels like. So the doctor said, I know. Why, just last week I had the same operation. But this Yid, not to be outdone, said, maybe you had the same operation, but you didn't have the same doctor that I did. So you still don't know what I feel like. There are situations in life where tzaddikim, talmidei chacham are called upon to put themselves in the situation of the person that they're dealing with. More than just to understand that person, but to envision as if he is the person himself. And that really is Hataras Nadarim, which is what Parshas Matos begins with. When the person goes to a Chacham and he says, I made a neder, I made a vow, I need you to be matir the neder, the Chacham will look for a Pesach. He will say to the person, tell me the circumstances of the vow. The person will explain everything. What the neder is, what motivated him to make the neder. And then he will say to the Chacham, can you undo the neder? And the Chacham will say, did you know at the time of the neder this and this? And the person may say, no, I wasn't aware of that. Had I known that, I would have not made the neder. So the Chacham declares it a valid Pesach, a way out of the neder, and he says, mutar lach, mutar lach, mutar lach. The neder has been absolved. The Chacham is oike the neder meikar. Think about what happened over here. The Chacham is the one who has to decide whether the Pesach is a valid Pesach. Is this true? Is this accurate? When we say, had he known about a certain detail, he would have never made the neder. Now, how can a person estimate that? If I come to a Rav and I ask him, Shaila, here's the chicken. Is this bone kosher or treif? He looks at the bone and decides whether it's kosher or treif. If two people come to the Rav and express their opposing views about an argument, so the Rav can paskin, you're chayav, you're potter. But how does a person come to a Rav and say, well, Rav, is this true? Had I known this and this, I would have never made the neder? How is the Rav supposed to know what he would have done or what he wouldn't have done had he known something that he only knows now and not then? So besides the fact, of course, he has to know Masechtas Nedarim, he has to know all of the Shitas and all of the Paiskim, besides the technicalities, the Rav over here has to sort of transfer his very essence into the personality of the one who comes with the Shaila. He has to get into that person's shoes and say, I am being motivated now to accept a vow. But I know about a certain detail. No, I wouldn't do it, or I would do it. There's no other way for the Rav to really draw a conclusion over here unless he feels and thinks like the person himself, like the one who's coming with the Shaila. Do we have a Pesach? Can I say that the neder was made b'tas? And that's why, as we learn in this week's Pasha, you need Gimel Hadyotis, 3 ordinary people to be matir and neder. Or if you have a Yachid Mumcha, you have a real tzaddik with smicha, it's enough one person. This isn't just some type of magic that a tzaddik has. The bigger a person is, the more he has the ability to actually feel like the one who comes with the Shaila. That is, I have to dismiss all of my own personal problems now and the way I think, and I have to think the way this person thinks. It takes a very great person to do it. So if the people are not that great, it would take a bezdin of 3 to work this out amongst themselves. A greater person can do it on his own. In the emphasis, this is part of the lesson that Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching over here to the heads of the Shvatim of Klal Yisrael. He's teaching them how to deal with people and how to feel for someone else, and how to dismiss your personal metzias when it comes to dealing with someone else's problem. Vayidaber Moshe al Roshei HaMatos l'Bnei Yisrael Leimar, and Moshe spoke to the heads of the Shvatim of the children of Israel Leimar. How can we work out this word Leimar over here? So you're going to ask me, just this Leimar you don't understand? There isn't a parasha L'Tayah that doesn't have several times Vayidaber Shema Moshe Leimar. What's so hard about this Leimar? Stop and think. This Leimar is different than the other words Leimar that appear in the classical Vayidaber Shema Moshe Leimar. The Gemara says in Masechtas Yuma, how do we know that if someone tells you something, you have to assume that you have no permission to repeat it unless he tells you otherwise? In other words, if someone tells you something and you go and you repeat it to others, and those others repeat it to others, and soon everyone knows about it, and the original person comes back to you with a taina, why did you tell everyone? So there are 2 things that don't work. It won't work to say, I didn't tell everyone, I just told one person, because that's the same as telling everyone. We've mentioned many times, the footnote Chaim Bracha said, the only difference between a secret and a non-secret is that a secret you say to one person at a time. But ultimately it's the same thing. Everyone finds out about it. So that's not an excuse. And another defense, which is useless, is that you didn't tell me not to repeat it. That's not an excuse. You have to assume that you cannot repeat it unless you're told that you could, not the other way around. The Gemara says in Masechtas Yuma, how do we know if someone says something to a friend? That you have no permission to repeat it. Unless instructed otherwise, unless the person says lechamar, go and say it. How do we know that? Because the pasuk says and the Mashal explains, what does the Gemara mean? What does the word lamar emphasize? Hashem spoke to Moshe Miyel Mayed, but Moshe cannot assume automatically, I must go spread the word. Lamar. Hashem indicated to Moshe Rabbeinu, go ahead and say it, go ahead and repeat it. So all the lamars in the Torah, in a sense, as the Shina B'Rav understands, are put into this context. V'yadaber Hashem el Moshe lamar. Hashem spoke to Moshe, and then conveyed to Moshe, more than just permission, the obligation that he had to give this over to the Bnei Yisrael. If not, Moshe would have assumed that he has no right to repeat it. So that's all fine and well, b'chol Torah kula. But over here in Pashas Matos, it's problematic, says the Shina B'Rav. So Yadaber Moshe Roshei HaMatos L'Bnei Yisrael Leimar. So Moshe spoke to the heads of the Shvatim. Okay, very good. And the Leimar means that they were supposed to convey the message further. But what does the pasuk say? Vayter. If you look at the next words of the pasuk, it says Zehadova Asher Tzivu Hashem. And Rashi tells us, amongst several different drushes, that Zehadova teaches, one of them is that this parasha was said initially la'aron u'lebanav u'lechol b'nei Yisrael. All the b'nei Yisrael were present right there and then. Although Moshe Rabbeinu is talking to the heads of the Shvatim, but the b'nei Yisrael were all present. So how do you understand the word lamar? Moshe Rabbeinu was told you have permission to spread this further. The Rashi and Matos are told, go ahead, give them the news. Give who the news? Everyone is here. It's not shy if you can spread the news further. There's no further here. All of Klal Yisrael is present. So it must be, says the Shina B'Rav, that this word lamar teaches us a whole different lesson. And the Shina B'Rav gives us a fascinating yesod over here. The Gemara in Moed Katan says, the Sisei Koyin Yishmelu Das V'Torah Yivakshem Mitiu Ki Malach Hashem Tzavakei. So that pasuk teaches us, if you want to pick a Rebbe, then you want to know who's appropriate for you. How do you know if someone is worthy to be a Rebbe? In Daima Harav L'Malach Hashem Tzavakei, if the Rebbe is Daima to a Malach, then Yivakshu Torah Mitiu. Seek Torah from his mouth. V'yim Lav, if your Rebbe is not a Malach, Al Yivakshu Mitiu. Now, besides the obvious difficulties with this, in fact, the Shina B'Rav are rather simple question. If my guidelines are, okay, if my Rebbe is a Malach, I shall learn Torah from him. If not, no. Well, who do I compare him with? Where have I seen a Malach to know if my Rebbe is a Malach or not? They say a story, Rav Yitzchak Skler had a special menorah made. A long story of a Hanukkah menorah. He hired special artisans to create it with certain kavanas. He said, if this menorah, he will march toward Melech HaMashiach, is buried someplace in Russia. And when he told the silversmiths, and over here, I want a little sketch of a malach on the silver. So they said to him, but how do we know what a malach looks like? So he said, oh, sorry, should have told you. So we explained to them what a malach looks like. But most of us don't know what a malach looks like. So how could the Gemara give a general message to all of Klal Yisrael, those of us who have seen malachim and the vast majority of us who didn't? If your Rebbe is doimah to a malach, seek Torah from his mouth. How am I supposed to know if he's doimah to a malach or not? I have to first see a malach. And for the Shina B'Rav, the definition of malach is a shliach of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. The pasuk says, "V'yishlach Yisrael malachim." The pasuk shot is, he sent messengers. Rashi tells us in Pashas Vayishlach, the Hamalachim ein lehem shem kavua, mishtanis shemoisem hakol lefi mitzvos avodas hashlichus shehem mishtalchim. That's what the Malach told Yaakov Avinu.
We don't have permanent names. Our name depends on what we're being sent for. We have the name of the shlichus that we're being sent for. What does this mean, says the Shinabara? When a malach is sent on a mission, the malach has one thing in mind, that he reaches that objective. As opposed to a human being, even if you have a human being that is loyal to the king, if he is sent on a mission, of course he wants to be successful. But Lamaisa, in the back of his mind, he is thinking, I hope I'm going to be successful so the king will now trust me and I'll get a promotion. I hope I'm going to be successful so the papers will write about how smart I am, how efficient I am, how intelligent I am, and so on. Practically what happens is that when the king needs someone for an assignment, so those assignments that are going to bring a person a good press, that are going to make him famous, you'll have a long line of people clamoring to volunteer. But when the king needs something which is even more essential for the security of the country, but no one is ever going to know who accomplished it, the king may have problems finding someone. There will always be a few good men, but you won't have people clamoring at the door. And that's what makes a malach different than most people. The malach has no name, meaning his interest is not in glorifying his own name. His interest is the assignment. For the malach, it makes no difference whether he's sent to arrest a criminal and his name will be in all the papers of the world, or he's sent to prevent a crime from ever happening, where no one is even going to know what he did. For the malach, it's all the same. And that's what the Gemara means. If your Rebbe is like a malach, then learn Torah from him. Meaning, if you find a person that is sincere and wants to teach and wants people to learn, and he is not interested at all about what anyone is saying about him, grab him. He's your Rebbe. So let me share something with you from my own personal experience. Sometimes you hear a real great story, a very inspirational word, almost of the Vedichasa, and you think to yourself, this will be great for my next speech. People will love this. You'll get a good round of applause, a good laugh, painting. And the next time you have an opportunity to speak to people, you use it. But sometimes you begin to manipulate, to make shusbanos. You say, let's say, tonight I'm speaking to 20 people. But tomorrow I have a speech to 100 people. I'm not going to use up the story tonight. I'll rather use it tomorrow to the 100 people. Because if this is such a geschmack story that's going to keep people at the edge of their seats, wouldn't I rather save it for when I'll get better coverage? Or wouldn't I rather save it for tomorrow, because tomorrow I know there's an important person going to be in the audience and I want him to hear this geschmack story or see how the audience is riveted to what I have to say? And I can tell you from experience, whenever I tried to do that, things usually fell flat. Meaning, either the speech never worked out the next day, either it wasn't as exciting as I thought it would be. It's like the Baldashin who said, it's not so much that people look at their watch during the speech, but when they shake it to see why it's not moving, that really gets to you. Because the truth is, you never know. Whenever you address an audience, you never know, really, whether you'll get a good reception, or people will be excited, or they'll go on their way through. And sometimes you're caught by surprise when you think that you don't have really good chaymer, that the Hashem gives you the schacter, the shmaya, that somehow your words are appreciated. And sometimes when you think that you have a drasha, down to the it schleps and you can't seem to get to the end of it, to get to that bracha and bring the gula shleim already, because you hear those chairs shuffling. And I've often found it to be the case. If you do your best and you say, let me take whatever I have to try to be mechazik the other one, and use that for the next group of people that you're speaking, then Baruch Hashem there's a siyag b'shmai. If you try manipulating, where am I going to get a better press, or where am I going to say this, or where am I going to say that, so people will like it more and it'll be more popular, it always falls flat. Because if you have this chus of being mechazik others, the Rebbeinu Shem doesn't want you to take your own popularity into account. The Rebbeinu Shem wants you to commit yourself to whomever your next assignment is, with whatever material you have. And that is where the Shina Rav says a pella de gazach. Now, let me just be magnet. He's not referring here to a minimum of halacha or gemara or shiurim. Of course, those things you have to prepare. But he says was very often tzaddikim, when they would stand, talk to people, give them chizuk or yiras shamayim, they didn't prepare before what they had to say. The Torah Friday night by the table, they dafka didn't prepare it. Whatever came into their mouth, they felt that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants them to say. Of course, they may have spent the whole Thursday night up learning Sifrei Mitzvot, Sifrei Chassidus, filling up their hearts with knowledge, with Ahavas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. But they didn't sit down to figure out, now let me present a real good speech, a good opening line, a good ending line, and so on. Because that would have meant I'm looking at how I'm going to come across. Lamer, whatever came out of their mouth, they said. Dr. Shnev Rav Moshe Rabbeinu is addressing over here the Rashi HaMatos, and he's teaching them how would you matter neder, how do you put yourself in the place of a person who's asking a shayla, not just in regard to Nedarim, but b'chlal, any machanach, whether you're being mechazik a neighbor, your friend, your child, whether you're a rebbe, whether you're a teacher by virtue of your actions because people are watching you, it doesn't make a difference. V'yidaber Moshe or Rashi HaMatos of Bnei Yisrael with one message, Leimer, just say what is on your heart. Don't manipulate, don't try to figure out what people are going to like, where are you going to get a better press. Leimer, just say what is on your heart. Here what's on my heart, this is what Hashem wants. But if I start manipulating and calculating where I'm going to sound better, where I'm going to get a bigger crowd, then it's not necessarily Zeh Davar Shetziva Hashem. It may be what you want. It may not necessarily be what Hashem wants. So imagine you're sitting on a bus, and your next door neighbor, an encyclopedia salesman, says, "No, tell me a good word." And behind you see a famous Rosh Hashiva, and you'd love to impress him with a good word. And you say, no. This yid needs the chizuk. He asked me for it. I'm not looking over here to score points. And you turn to him and you say the word. Then you're a malach. Then you understand the word leimer in this week's parsha.
This shiur is distributed by Kolodaf, 11 Seichenet Street, Yerushalayim. For donations, please call 02-5383-999. Fax 02-538-0267. Postbox 57035.